First at 5 o'clock, a new Supreme Court ruling clarifies its previous 2020 McGirt ruling on tribal jurisdiction. Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday. I'm Lori Fulbright.
And I'm Craig Day. In the case called Oklahoma versus Castro Huerta, the Supreme Court decided the state of Oklahoma can prosecute people who are not tribal citizens for crimes committed on tribal land when the victim is Native American. Justice Brett Kavanaugh wrote for the majority and said since about 43% of Oklahoma is now considered Indian country, the question of whether the state of Oklahoma retains concurrent jurisdiction to prosecute has suddenly assumed immense importance.
Now, the dissenting opinion says the decision allows Oklahoma to intrude on a feature of tribal sovereignty recognized since the founding. And we are getting reaction from both tribal leaders and the Tulsa County District Attorney to today's decision.
News on 6's Jonathan Cooper joins us live with more. Jonathan?
Craig and Lori, Tulsa County District Attorney Steve Kunzweiler is praising the Supreme Court's decision today. The Cherokee Nation, though, and some other tribes are not, and they have a very different opinion. 2 years after the United States Supreme Court ruled tribes in eastern Oklahoma were never disestablished as statehood, the court is giving some prosecuting power back to the state. It's a big change in how District Attorney Steve Kunzweiler's office will be able to prosecute crimes in Tulsa County.
Well, it's a big victory for the state of Oklahoma. We've held that since 1907 we have jurisdiction over all crimes committed within our borders.
Today's ruling in Oklahoma versus Castro Huerta means thousands of previous cases referred to the federal government after 2020 will now fall back under the state's jurisdiction. Victor Castro Huerta was convicted by a Tulsa County jury for severely neglecting his disabled stepdaughter and sentenced to 35 years in state prison. Assistant DA Kevin Gray prosecuted the case.
I mean, law enforcement was in tears when they walked into that house and saw the conditions that child was living in.
But after the McGirt ruling, Castro Huerta appealed, pled guilty in federal court, and took a 7-year sentence, a 28-year reduction.
I think at this point now, the instructions will be to the Court of Criminal Appeals that their vacation of his sentence was inappropriate. His sentence will stand, his judgment and sentence will stand, and I anticipate he'll go back to penitentiary in Oklahoma.
Gray and Kunzweiler say they'll go back and look at similar cases now just like this in Tulsa County. Tribal leaders, though, disagree with today's ruling.
It's disappointing because this decision is at odds with years, decades, really, of precedent.
Cherokee Nation Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin Jr. tells me today the court is undermining tribal sovereignty.
Today does change a key aspect of McGirt, but it doesn't change what's fundamental in this country, which is that this country has a promise it needs to keep to tribes.
And the Muskogee Nation agrees with the Cherokee Nation, saying it's an alarming step backward for justice. They also add that public safety would be better served by expanding tribal authority to prosecute any crime committed by any offender within our reservation boundaries, rather than empowering entities that have demonstrated a lack of commitment to public safety on Indian lands. Reporting live in Tulsa tonight, Jonathan Cooper, Oklahoma's own News on 6.
Governor Kevin Stitt, on the other hand, calls today's ruling a victory for all 4 million Oklahomans. He released a statement saying justice has been delayed and denied to thousands of Native victims in our state for no reason other than their race. Now, he says, Oklahoma law enforcement can help uphold and enforce the law equally as we have done for over a century. The governor says he looks forward to working with leaders across the state to combating what he calls the criminal justice crisis in Oklahoma.